The 1999 European Grand Prix at the Nürburgring in Germany came at the height of the battle for the World Championship, as after 13 rounds it was dead even in the championship standings between Hakkinen and Irvine, with Heinz-Harald Frentzen just 10 points behind and getting more and more competitive all the time. In fact, it was Frentzen who took pole position this time, ahead of the two McLarens, with Coulthard out-qualifying Hakkinen. Ralf Schumacher took 4th place on the grid, Frentzen's teammate Hill was only 7th, and for some reason the Ferraris could only manage 9th and 12th in qualifying. When the race got underway, it didn't! Watch this! The lights came on, but they didn't go out, and the front of the grid all jumped the start and then stopped. To explain why this happened, you must first understand how the starting system works. You see, nowadays when the race director initiates the starting sequence, there's a hold for a partially randomized length of time before the lights go out and the race can begin. Back in those days, however, the length of time between the race director pressing the button and the start of the race was predetermined, and some of the teams allegedly figured out that if they could intercept the radio signal between the button and the lighting gantry, then they could work out exactly when the race would begin. A computer would then play a beep in the driver's earphones exactly 1/10 of a second before the start, allowing the driver to start the race perfectly. On this occasion, however, Alex Zanardi lined up out of position on the grid, causing the race director to abort the start of the race during the lighting sequence. As this was after the starting sequence had already been initiated, the beep still happened and the driver still reacted, even though the lights stayed on. What ensued was what you're witnessing. Interestingly enough, the FIA never actually announced that they caught the teams cheating, and no one was ever penalised. This led people to believe that they had deliberately changed the starting procedure without telling the teams, and they never admitted this for fear of backlash. Whatever happened though, the start sequence was officially randomised shortly afterwards. After that history lesson, here's the second attempt at a start, and funnily enough, Zanardi is still out of position. They decided to get going anyway though, and when the race got underway, Frentzen maintained the lead ahead of Hakkinen, who passed Coulthard. Then there was carnage at the first chicane. Look in the background as Pedro Diniz flips over and digs into the grass, a monstrous shunt. The replay shows that it was all triggered by Damon Hill having an electrical malfunction in the first corner, causing Irvine to get boxed in behind him. Alesi and Salo then took avoiding action, but Wirtz had nowhere to go except right into the side of Diniz, flipping him over. Wirtz, of course, is a man who knows what it feels like to go for a tumble. Amazingly, Pedro was okay, despite the roll hoop completely failing Guan Yu Zhou style. In my opinion, this was one of the luckiest escapes of all time in F1, and it could very easily have ended in tragedy. When the race got going again, this time as a rolling restart, it was still Frentzen up in front, but look at Coulthard putting pressure on Hakkinen behind. You'd think there would be team orders there, with Hakkinen fighting Irvine for the championship, but Coulthard was still in contention at this point too, and did not want to give up. Speaking of Irvine, he got up into the points with this pass on Parnas into the chicane. Fisichella proved a bit tougher to pass for 5th place though. Here they are a lap later with Irvine trying to go right around the outside of the Dunlop hairpin. On lap 11 this happened, a collision between Zanardi and Takagi that caused the Williams driver's engine to stall. It looks to me as if Takagi had already had an incident with Alesi, who was moving slowly in the background, and then he didn't realise that there were 2 cars on his inside as Zanardi and Zonta came through together. To be fair, Zonta did a great job to back out of that one, and in the end only 2 cars came to blows rather than all 3. And of course, because this was the 90s, the marshals worked to remove the car with only double-waved yellows covering the accident zone. Yikes. Anyway, here's another chance for Irvine, although a very unhelpful camera angle makes it tricky to see what's actually happening into turn 1. Oh, there we are, and it looks like Fisichella's 5th place will survive for another lap. Eventually, Eddie got through due to a simple mistake from Giancarlo. Watch the Benetton run wide and through the grass in the S's, allowing Irvine through. This battle had actually lasted a good 10 or so laps of the race, even though I only showed a few short clips here, so you can imagine the relief. Oh, look at the umbrellas going up! Mother Nature clearly felt that this race needed even more intrigue, because the drizzle started up right as the top 4 were on track together. Then came the question of whether or not it would be a quick shower and whether to pit for wets. Oh my goodness guys, listen to Murray here.
The lap before you were okay, there was enough grip, and suddenly...
We're looking, Murray, and we're watching as the McLarens struggle through the dampening chicane. Now look at Ralf Schumacher up the inside of Coulthard, and he gets it. Ralf had been sticking with the McLarens and he looked extremely good in these conditions, and Coulthard got him back on the exit. Down into turn 1, Ralf lunged and he very nearly slammed into the back of Mika Hakkinen, but he made it through in 3rd place, separating the McLarens. As dry as it looked in that last shot, it was absolutely soaked at the chicane, and believe it or not, this is the same lap. Look, Frenzen's gone straight across the chicane. Amazingly, he decided to stay out on dry tyres. Goodness me. Hakkinen was the only one of the top 4 cars to pit on this lap, despite the absolute downpour. Meanwhile, Mika Salo had suffered a 38-second long pit stop for Ferrari, but at least the Scuderia was warmed up, so nothing could possibly go wrong in Irvine's stop. See? The fastest pit stop of all time! Well done, Ferrari. So, after that little flurry, look at the track, it's drying! After what looked like the logical choice to pit for wet tyres, Mika Hakkinen was stuck out there cursing the sky as his luck turned. The order was now Frentzen, followed by Schumacher and Coulthard, and Hakkinen was, for now, out of the equation. And that just adds insult to injury. That's Eddie Irvine passing his championship rival Hakkinen on track on the dry tyres his team had to put back on due to the pit stop blunder. Mika was then forced to pit again, dropping him even further back. On lap 26, Ralf Schumacher pitted from 2nd place, allowing Coulthard to put pressure on Frentzen for the first time. Frentzen clearly felt that pressure because watch this, he missed the chicane for a 2nd time. Despite that, he held the lead. On lap 32, both Frentzen and Coulthard came in for their stops and they exited ahead of Schumacher, putting 2 lapped cars between them, including Hakkinen. Then there was major drama as Heinz-Harald Frentzen ground to a halt in the first chicane. According to legend, he had simply forgotten to turn his pit speed limiter off, making this one of the most embarrassing ways to lose a Grand Prix of all time. Personally, I find this hard to believe, as he would have pressed the speed limiter button so many times in his career that it would have been like second nature to him, so I'm willing to accept the team's explanation that this was an electrical issue. Whatever the case, his race was over and he would never again win a Grand Prix. The order was now Coulthard 1st, Schumacher 2nd, Barrichello 3rd, and look at the circuit, it's raining again! And of course there's Hakkinen not making it easy for Schumacher to get past. I wonder whose call that was. Just how wet is it though? Allow Mika Salo to demonstrate. You could also ask the leader, of course! Off went David Coulthard from the lead of the race, through the gravel, and even though he only lightly nudged the tyres, he was out as well. Ralf Schumacher took the lead, and remember, this is Ralf Schumacher, not Michael. He was yet to win a race up to this point. Also by this point, Rubens Barrichello had made a pit stop, so now it was Fisichella 2nd, and Johnny Herbert was up to 3rd for Stewart.
And on your toes, boys, the Ferrari mechanics, with hopefully 4 tyres and wheels in the pit lane.
Yes, hopefully indeed, because Irvine's about to stop. You can never be too sure though. And now an off for Fisichella too! He just kept it out of the wall and maintained 2nd place, but he so nearly joined Coulthard and Frentzen as a gutted spectator. Great save. On lap 46, Ralf Schumacher came in for his 2nd stop. He had done an awesome job to stay out on dry tyres for long enough to stick to his original strategy, but now he had both Fisichella and Herbert ahead of him on the track, and no telling what the weather would do. Johnny Herbert was sensationally catching the Benetton as well, and it looked to be a 3-car race for the win. That of course did not include Toranosuke Takagi, who ended his chance at points by slamming into the wall. This was a fairly dangerous crash considering that one of the wheels then started to meander back onto the track, but luckily it was avoided by all and the race continued. On lap 49, off went Fisichella again, and this time he stalled the engine. His chance of a first Grand Prix win was over at the same corner that he'd had issues with earlier on. Unbelievably, this was the 3rd time this race that someone had retired from the lead, and it gave P1 right back to Ralf Schumacher. Surely it wouldn't happen again though, right? It did! A puncture forced Ralphie off the road and into the gravel. What the heck is going on? And just look at the order now. Johnny Herbert leads from Jarno Trulli's Prost, Rubens Barrichello's Stewart, Luca Badoer's Minardi, and Ralf Schumacher, who maintained 5th despite a puncture. Both Minardi and BAR were yet to score a point in 1999, and they were running 4th and 6th respectively. Oh no, scratch what I just said about Minardi. Tragically, with 12 laps to go in the race, Luca Badoer lost his chance to equal Minardi's best ever result as his gearbox failed him. After several unsuccessful previous stints in F1, Luca had been itching to thank Minardi for giving him another chance, but sadly he failed to bring them any points, although it was through no fault of his own. This was where the iconic image came from of Luca crying on his car, and honestly, who can blame him? Despite his best efforts, he still holds the record for the most race starts without a point. Still in the race, Hakkinen and Irvine were once again fighting just as they had been all year, although there was a muted feeling to it since they were battling for 7th, which back in those days yielded no points at all. Even so, they treated each other with aggression, and Hakkinen ended up cutting the chicane. Both of these drivers were beginning to catch Marc Genet for 6th place and 1 World Championship point. By the way, if you were wondering which driver you just saw walking down the pit lane, that's Pedro de la Rosa, who by this point was out with a gearbox failure. Also out due to off-screen retirements are Alesi in the Sauber and Salo in the second Ferrari. It's quite nice to be able to talk about traditional battles actually, rather than just crashes and retirements. Here's Barrichello saying hello to the fellow in the Prost as they fought for 2nd place. Rubens attempted a move into the chicane, but just like Hakkinen he found his path blocked. Oh, back to the retirements. There's the extremely unreliable BAR of Jacques Villeneuve predictably retiring from the race. Yes, that's the car that was tipped to win the championship in its first season. Only 9 cars remained in the race then, with 5 laps to go, and Marc Genet was up to 5th place for Minardi as 2nd and 3rd place continued to fight. So too did Irvine and Hakkinen, and off went Irvine in a massive plume of tyre smoke. This fight that seemed to be for nothing before was suddenly crucially important, as the 2 championship contenders had been dead even on points before the start of this race, thus making this the fight for the championship lead. Hakkinen was through, and he began to reel in Marc Genet. Meanwhile, look at this! Barrichello has a real chance and goes to the outside of the chicane, twitches about, and somehow still loses out. I thought for sure that was going to be a Stewart 1-2 the first time I saw this. That's how you pass a slower car, look. Hakkinen gets Genet for 5th. Whatever the case though, a Stewart did indeed win the European Grand Prix courtesy of Johnny Herbert. It was a stunning victory, one that caught everyone by surprise, and it was not just his final Grand Prix victory, but Stewart Grand Prix's only one. Jarno Trulli just about held on for 2nd place, scoring his first podium and the Prost team's last podium, and Barrichello came home in 3rd for the Stewart team's last podium finish before they became Jaguar for 2000. Don't quote me on this because I don't know for sure, but I think this may have been the only Grand Prix in history where the top 3 cars were all run by former F1 drivers, in this case Alain Prost and Sir Jackie Stewart. 4th place was Ralf Schumacher despite his puncture, 5th was Mika Hakkinen, and 6th was Marc Genet, scoring his first point and Minardi's first point in 4 years. Only 9 cars finished in the end, in what was a truly crazy race of attrition. Guys, before I give this race a score, I want to let you know that I have a Daily Motion account for all the races that get taken down from my YouTube channel by the pesky FOM bots. Due to the high levels of parody, review and education my videos contain, as well as the short lengths of the clips I use, I believe that all of my videos fall under fair use, but sadly this isn't always enough. On my Daily Motion account, you can find the 1996 Monaco and Portuguese Grand Prix, as well as any other video that may end up being taken down from my YouTube channel. The link is in the description. Thank you. I gave the Grand Prix my first ever 10 out of 10 because it truly had everything. There was unpredictability, there was joy, there was heartbreak, there was attrition, there were championship contenders fighting for scraps on track. In my opinion, this was the best Grand Prix ever up until that point in time. I gave the Driver of the Day award for Best Driver to Luca Badoer, who had not just been running in the points when he retired, but in 4th frickin' position, in a Minardi. I'll give the Inouye Trophy for Worst Driver to Teranosuke Takagi for being involved in 2 of the crunch count incidents. Drive safely guys, and I'll see you next time.